for a few days, as I keep saying on Wednesday morning. We can leave the politicians out of the equation for a while. We'll bring them back this fall. We have an excellent and interesting guest this morning. I'm going to have Judy introduce the gentleman in just a few minutes. As you might remember, Mr. Ash and Mrs. Busby and Greg, we always try to start Viewpoint with a kudo or two, what's going on in the community and so forth. It occurred to me this morning it might be very appropriate to raise a kudo and tip my hat, our collective hats, the county, the city, I should say, the collective hats of those in the city. And thank you to Assistant Chief of Police Mike Garriott on his retirement after 25 great years of serving his community. I'd like to add mine to that too, Bill. He's a great fellow. He's kind. He's honest. He's sensitive. He's a wonderful man, and best wishes to him. Yes, we wish Mike well. And by the way, he's a consummate gentleman too. Amen. Another thing that happened over the weekend, the folks, the Open Arms Christian Church folks, put on this big fun day at, for want of a better word, and I know that's not exactly the correct word, at Scully Park. This is I think, I'm not certain how many, but they've had several in a row now. They get bigger and more successful. Hats off to them for that community activity. But the big thing I want to mention is the next day I went out to the, Monday I went out to the rec, and as I went by Scully Park, I took particular note of the grounds clean as a whistle. There wasn't any debris on those grounds at all, and so the folks at the Open Arms Christian Church obviously policed the territory very, very well. So I think that's a big kudo. Yes. Yes, all right. Why don't we have an important subject matter this morning, so let's get right into that, Mrs. Busby. Our guest is Greg Wooten, and he's from Safe Haven Hospice, also a minister at the Church of the Nazarene in Lincoln. The Church of the Nazarene. That's the one with the big lawn, right? we do have a big lawn. Yes, you do. Greg specializes in trying to help people deal with the loss of their loved ones. He's a bereavement counselor, and of course he had experience in that as a minister, and then it just kind of segued on into becoming a grief counselor for Safe Haven. And I think that's a very interesting undertaking on your part, because as we were talking before we came in here, there are such vast ranges of grief and grieving. Mm-hmm. And some people just seem to have an awful time dealing with the loss of a loved one, and how difficult it must be to get in the right door of their minds so that you can be of help. Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. You have to reach them where they are, don't you? Yes, yes. Well, first let me say thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. Thank you. And in reference to what you were talking about, Judy, people often are surprised, I think, at the scope of hospice services, and don't realize that hospice services aren't just medical. You know, that hospice is a package of services to terminal patients and their families. Mm-hmm. That includes, of course, nurses and CNAs, mm-hmm. but it also includes social workers. It includes volunteers that could come and do practical things around the house, like housekeeping, mowing the lawn, sometimes just sitting and keeping patients and their families company. Chaplains can be involved as well. And in my case, I serve as the bereavement coordinator for Safe Haven. Mm-hmm. And I often get asked the question, how does somebody become a bereavement coordinator? How can you coordinate someone's grief? Yeah, how would you do that? Well, I haven't quite figured that out completely yet. I don't think anybody will. Yeah. You know. But I became a bereavement coordinator as a bereaved person
About 4 years ago, I lost my younger brother, who was my best friend, to complications from leukemia. And through that loss, through my own personal experience of grief, became involved in a program that is operated really nationwide, but there are local groups that meet in many locales. But I became in a program called Grief Share, and Grief Share is generally a church-based program to help people cope with loss. I knew at that point in my life that I wasn't coping very well with that loss, and so I attended Grief Share as a grieving person. It wasn't too long into that I was asked by Keith Boggs, who was leading the group at the time, if I would be interested in co-leading it with him. So I became a leader of the Grief Share group locally, and then that led to my now employment with Safe Haven Hospice. In this role, my job really is to follow up. So what I was saying earlier about the range of services that hospice provides, we provide grief support for up to 13 months following the death of our patients. So for me, that means using whatever means is available and welcome to keep in contact with the families of our patients after they pass. Oftentimes that's by mail, but sometimes it's by email, sometimes by phone, sometimes in person, and sometimes in the context of a grief support group.
Being the individuals we are, each and every one of us react in a different way.
Absolutely.
To emergencies or death or whatever. So I guess it's safe to say you have a lot of balls in the air, if you excuse the expression here, as a juggler, to react to the different ways that people react to their own bereavement.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. Judy and I were discussing just a little bit earlier that the range of how people grieve is so very different, because it's not just the person doing the grieving, it's the nature of the relationship that was lost. It has to do with oftentimes how the person that you've lost passed, whether it was something that happened very suddenly or something that happened over a long period of time, where there may have been significant grieving that was going on during a person's illness. It has to do with a number of different factors, and grief expresses itself in so many different ways. Speaking from personal experience, grief expressed itself in my life in insomnia. It robbed me of sleep for several months. I was functioning on 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night, and that wasn't very restful.
That's
even
impossible.
Yeah. Grief Share was instrumental in my recovery process, and so that's again how I came to promote it as being a valuable tool for those that are struggling in their grief.
Is the sharing oftentimes helpful to a person who's grieving, or can it just keep reopening the wound?
That's a really good question. What's necessary, I think, in the process of grief recovery is to find an outlet, to find a means by which those feelings that tend to be built up inside and are so hard to share in many instances, they need to have an outlet of some kind. The sharing component of Grief Share is voluntary. It's not compulsory. You don't have to come into the group and pour your heart out each and every time. But most of the time, what I've found is that you're in the context of a group of persons that all have experienced loss in one way or another, and it has a safe feeling to it. In other words, I don't know that I would go and I would cry on anybody's shoulder about how I'm feeling inside. But in the context of the group, you realize that we're all, even though our grief is very different, we're all experiencing grief. And even though it expresses itself differently in everyone's life and everyone's loss is different, there is still that common aspect of the journey that we're on. And that gives us a great deal of freedom. And most of the people I know that have been through Grief Share would say that the sharing component has been a healing thing for them.
I hope this isn't a lousy analogy, but you know, when your children are young and you've got 3 kids going 3 directions and you think you're a lousy mother because you can't keep it all together, it's so helpful, I think, to have your friends who are in the same boat you are, and you see, well, I'm not crazy. You know, we're all feeling the same way about this business of trying to keep 3 kids going. So I suppose that component
that's
is
not
comforting.
not
seeing that I'm not crazy because I'm feeling this way. These
Right.
people do too.
Yeah, that's not a bad comparison at all. Just having persons who understand even a fraction of what it is that you're experiencing really, again, it brings a sense of that common experience that really takes some of the fear away and gives us the opportunity to lean on each other.
Many folks are, of course, and we all know this, are very private by nature. And sharing what is on their mind with others is not an easy thing to do. Some can never do that. In your experience with group counseling, have you encountered folks who have begin little by little to open up a little bit?
Again, I'll refer to personal experience first.
Yes.
It wasn't until probably Grief Share generally runs 13 weeks at a time, so it's a scheduled, a programmed type of curriculum. But it wasn't until about halfway through that 13 weeks that I felt that I could start speaking about
so
the
you
grief that I
essentially
was
sat
feeling.
there and listened.
Yes.
Took it in.
Yes. Yeah. And not to lean too much on gender stereotypes, but generally, I think it's pretty common that that women have an easier time expressing those feelings than men. In fact, probably the majority of persons that we've had involved in Grief Share have been women.
As a pastor, though, you would have done an awful lot of listening. Maybe that just becomes a habit. You're a habitual listener.
That is one way to say it. I never thought about it that way, Judy. But yes, listening is, really, in my very limited experience, but in that experience, listening has been, one of the more important components. Trying to help people, trying to draw them out, by asking simple questions about how they're feeling. Just looking for those things that will start people sharing, start them talking, so that they can.
Speaking this morning about grief counseling, but I think it would be well to talk about safe haven.
Yes.
Hospice. Would you define that and kind of give us a range of the things that they perform but assist in aiding the assistants who need that kind of a service? Well,
hospice in general, people are often surprised to find out that hospice is more than one organization. I think in our collective conscience, we kind of see hospice as, wherever it is performed or whoever is doing it as all being the same. You work for hospice. But the truth is there are over 5,000 hospice organizations in the United States alone. So there's a pretty broad range of hospice services that are out there. Now, all of them provide essentially the services that I spoke about earlier: nurses and CNAs, social workers, volunteers, chaplains, bereavement support. All of those things are part of that package of services. But Safe Haven, we believe, has certain distinctives because we're a faith-based hospice. We strive to honor God in all that we do. And that goes from everybody from the administrative staff that works on the office side of things to the field staff that are involved in patient care. So really we want to honor God in everything that we do. We consider ourselves a life-valuing hospice. That means to us that we see people as being created in the image of God, and we treat them as such. Life is the gift of God, and that's the way we approach it. And so the care that we give reflects not only that aspect of valuing life as something that God values, but also lends itself to becoming, really in many aspects, speaking as a pastor, the care that our patients receive is in many ways pastoral. Even the nursing staff, in the things that they do the things that they do as and I'll use the word with some caution, as ministry, as service to people created in God's image. And kind of a new aspect of Safe Haven that we've taken on that I think sets us a little bit apart from other hospice organizations is we consider ourselves a teaching hospice. We welcome opportunities to greet the public and to educate them about the value and the scope of hospice services. Oftentimes, people don't really think about hospice until a patient is reaching their very final days, their final moments. And so if we can educate the public as to who is appropriate for hospice and when those services might become effective in a person's life, we can provide much better service, a much more comforting transition from this life to the next for families.
I think at this point in time, we'll take a short break, Greg, and we return. I'm going to ask a little bit more about how people get referred to or know about Safe Haven. So if the console master is ready, we'll flip some switches and run right into our commercials. And we're right back live in the studios of WLCN. And our guest this morning is Greg Wooten. He's representing Safe Haven Hospice. I'd like to ask you the question. I should also remark that the other chair here is Judith K. Busby. After all, she's a pretty doggone important part of this program, Greg. Without her, we don't fly. I would be in hospice without her.
Piffle.
Seriously, how do you your, for one of a better word, clients, if that's a correct word to use, how do they know about Safe Haven? Are they referred to by social agencies, by individuals, doctors, or pastors? Tell us a little bit about Safe Haven and its modus operandi, so to speak.
Yeah. The short answer to your question
that was a long question.
I know. Well, that's okay. The short answer to your question concerning are they referred by pastors, hospitals, yes, to all of those, essentially. People come to know about Safe Haven as an option, really, whenever someone is referred to hospice, whenever a physician or other medical personnel believe that somebody is a patient is hospice appropriate, then options are generally shown to patients and to their families as far as hospice organizations go. But Safe Haven, again, drawing upon our emphasis, our desire to honor God in what we do, we feel a strong partnership with churches. And so, at least as far as the educational component goes, we try to get the word out via our connections to churches within our service area, which now our service area covers. I think currently we are able to take patients in 24 counties.
It's quite a list.
So it is a long list.
Huge list, yes.
As far north as Chillicothe, as far south right now as Effingham.
Now, whence cometh the funding for this?
There is a hospice benefit in Medicare, and most private insurance companies do offer hospice benefits as well. So most of the time it comes via some type of insurance. In those instances where that's not available, then I know that there are persons, qualified persons, our social workers and others, that can try to help connect our patients with
House call is an
means.
obsolete word in today's medical world. Do you make house calls per se?
We do. In fact, it's kind of an interesting phenomena with some of the changes that are happening in healthcare law and shifting demographics as well. More and more of our patients are choosing to stay at home as long as they possibly can. So we care for patients in their homes. Our nurses, our CNAs, regularly visit patients in their homes, and that does. You could imagine in a territory that
Broad.
yes, that broad, that we do a lot of traveling. But yeah, we make house calls. Our chaplains do, and I should mention too that I didn't make clear perhaps that, you know, apart from the nursing component, all of the other services that we offer are optional. Patients do have the opportunity to opt out if they don't want chaplaincy, or if they don't want a social worker, if they don't want volunteers coming into their home. Those are purely voluntary.
But certainly the volunteers are screened very carefully.
Yes. Volunteers have to go through quite a rigorous process. It's a really good point. That includes fingerprinting for a background check and drug screenings. So, because, you know, these are people that will be going into people's homes and into other people's spaces. So our volunteers are very carefully screened, and we have a great core of volunteers. I think we have about 20 volunteers with Safe Haven right now, and they
They're
do.
locally.
Most of them are local.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. But they do some pretty remarkable things. You know,
That's a calling.
It really is. Yeah.
I noted here on this brochure that you say Safe Haven hospice staff will respond to customer pages within 15 minutes. Now, that's pretty remarkable. In other words, if I am receiving hospice care, I have a device with which I can page you.
Well, we have when we're not in regular office hours,
Yes.
then we have a service that if you contact them, they will contact the staff. So those.
So it's a matter of making a phone call.
A phone call, yeah. But it's a quick turnaround, though. I know our nursing staff respond very quickly to all the calls they receive.
And that's 24/7 basis.
It is.
You know, I bet you're the only people in captivity who respond within 15 minutes. I dare say.
Oh, I know. I kind of like refute that. We had a little episode at a funeral service Monday.
Yes.
And the emergency vehicle showed right up. I mean, Johnny on the spot twice, as a matter of fact.
Oh, those paramedics are good.
Oh yes, yes. But anyway, they were right on the ball there. Do you accept contributions?
We have a foundation that has been established that is used in a variety of ways, or can be used in a variety of ways. Oftentimes, it's called upon for maybe some of the practical needs. I seem to recall an instance last year when a home patient was living in their home without air conditioning, and so we used we used some of that foundation money to help provide an air conditioner. It's for practical needs oftentimes, and so yes, we can receive contributions. We're owned by Christian Homes Incorporated. We're under the parent company of Christian Homes, and of course, Christian Homes is not for profit. Yeah.
Every day we're supposed to learn something new. Today we were.
You learned something new today.
We can go on the rest of our day now.
Yeah.
Oh no, I strongly suspect that very few of us out here in Etherland knew that was for the parent umbrella.
Yeah, Safe Haven operates as its own entity,
Sure.
but we're under the umbrella of Christian Homes Incorporated.
Do you offer the bereavement counseling in group settings that meet every third Wednesday or every other Tuesday or what have you?
That's a good question. Locally, here in the Lincoln area, during the spring and the fall particularly, we do grief share. So starting, I think, in September, I believe it's the first Tuesday in September, we'll be starting up the next round of grief share. I've also been involved in grief support in Springfield at Senior Services of Central Illinois, and grief share here meets weekly. That meeting, I believe, started weekly. I've done occasional grief presentations in Bloomington, and I think also in Decatur. And then an aspect of grief support that sometimes can be very meaningful is the opportunity to attend a memorial service. This particularly happens with the skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities that we work with. We can work with them to help set up services of remembrance so that family members can come back to the facility where their loved one was cared for and have the opportunity to celebrate their life in that context. So those are some of the things that I involve myself in anyway.
648-5510 would be the number if anybody has any questions. Our guest this morning is Greg Wooten. We're discussing an organization that I think for the most part, Judith K., is kind of low on the horizon insofar as people understanding what it is and where it is and so forth. Safe Haven Hospice. The local office happens to be right here in Lincoln at 628 Broadway. Old-timers remember that. Well, there's nobody left except me. That would be the Avery and Comstock's store years back. And you have a staff up there that reports for work daily.
We have an incredible staff. Having contact with families of our patients after they've passed generally, and that's usually when I come into the picture. But almost inevitably, I will hear from those family members, "Oh, you'll never know what your nurse meant to us. You'll never know how much comfort this particular CNA was able to bring into the situation. I'll never forget." And so, yeah, we have an amazing staff, from our office support staff to the field staff. I am always constantly in awe of what they're able to do, what they do, the comfort that they bring, their heart for what they do.
Greg, the very word hospice, we all know that hospice organizations are available throughout the country for folks approaching the end. What is the genesis of hospice care? Do you know that by chance?
Well, our executive director, Greg Patterson, would be able to answer that question far better than I would be able to. But hospice, as it exists in the United States, I think has been around for roughly 30 to 40 years now. Really, it came into being, at least in part, from the kind of ministry, the kind of care for the dying that Mother Teresa was providing to the dying of Calcutta. And so, although I think it would be a stretch to call her the
originator of hospice.
The originator of hospice care, her model of care for providing comfort to those who are ready to pass from this life, really is what gave hospice its beginning, its roots here in the United States.
In your own life, when you helped other people get through a rough patch, did that in turn help you? And does that seem to be the case with most people, whether they work for hospice or are affiliated with it because of another reason? If they help somebody else, it helps them?
It's a great question, Judy. A term that I've often heard used in ministry regarding persons involved in helping people. Sometimes they're referred to as wounded healers. I have seen that's often the case. I know that a lot of the people that I work with serve, maybe not because of the experiences that they've had, but it definitely gives them an opportunity to bring the kind of comfort that they've received to bear on the situations, the patients, the family situations that they now are encountering. So yeah, I think that our personal experiences of pain and grief definitely play into that. I know, again, referring to my own loss, sadly, my brother did not, again, because we weren't well educated and well versed at that time in hospice services. My brother didn't benefit from hospice services, and so essentially he received about 12 hours of comfort care prior to his passing. But if people just knew how much comfort could happen over the span of weeks and sometimes months. Yes. And truly, we have some patients that last beyond a year even.
Well, 6 months is your usual service time,
That's right.
It says. But if you happen to be lucky or unlucky enough to surpass 6 months, I'm sure you don't just check them off.
No, not at all. Not at all. We have occasionally, our chaplain, Paul Boatman, refers to them as hospice graduates. Occasionally, we've had some that, because they have received the extra attention and care, they've done well enough that they would no longer qualify for hospice, and so they've been graduated in that sense from the hospice program. Now, that's not typical, but it does happen occasionally.
Could you define to qualify? I think that's important.
Well, essentially, if a physician is willing to state that a person is within the last 6 months of their life, if the disease that they have runs its natural course, they will pass within 6 months, then generally those persons are considered hospice appropriate. Now, there are a variety of conditions that might fall under that definition, as far as obviously a diagnosis of cancer that could lead to a person passing within 6 months. But there are other conditions as well: COPD, kidney failure, Alzheimer's, dementia, and that's, again, the medical staff would be able to tell you far more detail where that's concerned, but essentially what it boils down to is that a physician making a statement to a patient and their families that if the disease progresses according to its normal course, that very likely within 6 months they would pass.
You receive expressions of appreciation from folks?
Oh, fantastic ones. Yeah.
That's why I wanted to get into that question.
Yeah. And I get the benefit of seeing many of them because, again, much of the contact that I have with families is by mail. So oftentimes cards come into the office, or just yesterday I received an evaluation form that had just a marvelous statement about one of our nurses, and said that how blessed we are to have her on staff. And that's not uncommon. We see those kinds of things all the time. And again, it's just a testament to the people that I work with. They're amazing people who do wonderful things. And Judy, I'm going to reflect on something that you asked when we were off air, and if that's okay, if I've got the time to do that.
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
please do.
Well, Judy had asked me, how can you minister to people? How can you minister to people who maybe don't share a faith perspective? And the answer to that question, or the short answer to that question, is that actions often speak louder than words. And what we're able to do for them, expressing love to them in the way that we serve, in the way that we treat them, and the way that we minister to their loved ones, often has a greater impact than what we're able to actually say. So
actions do speak louder than words, don't they?
yes, they do.
Mm-hmm.
That particular subject, by the way, that was a pretty cogent question, young lady. The geographical area, you cover how many? Is this Lincoln the central office for all of these counties?
We recently, I think it was just a couple of months ago, we opened up an office in Effingham. So we have a second office down there now. Our nursing staff particularly are strategically located. Safe Haven hires its nursing staff according to the geographical regions so that they're within reach of the patients that they need to attend to.
And these are people that are essentially, nurses that are essentially, quote, on call by your office?
The nurses have an on-call rotation a calendar that they follow. But yeah, that regular patient schedule during the week, but then they share an on-call rotation.
So they see the same person then throughout the supposed 6 months?
Most of the time, yes.
Well, they would form, in 6 months, you could form a relationship with your HACCP,
Significant bonds. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're really in a constant state of grief, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful point, because we do form some attachments. It's not always easy to stay professionally detached, but again, our faith perspective helps us with that, because we see this as the opportunity to bring life's journey to a successful close. To prepare people for the transition from what is to what is to come, because we believe that there is more to life than just this physical presence that we live.
If you were able to maintain a professional detachment, you wouldn't be much good.
Well, that's a difficult one to comment on, but I think that being able to balance, I think. I often point to our chaplain as the perfect balance of someone who is able to maintain I'll use the word clinical presence, but always a caring pastoral presence. And so he kind of is our model at least I know he's mine as far as trying to maintain that balance of really genuinely caring for those persons that have been entrusted to us, but also being able to not be overcome and overwhelmed by the emotions that might wash over us whenever they pass.
Well, you wouldn't be any good to somebody if you were being sloppily emotional.
Right.
Either.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
that's the point I wanted to make. Some of us are a little more emotional than others.
Yes.
For instance, with my makeup, I could not work under that umbrella because sometimes my emotions come on my sleeve, and that's not necessarily a good trait. So it takes a special
It is
calling.
with you, though, Bill.
And the final question would be, you are in concert with the pastors in our community.
I am.
And all of them know about your services and what you have to offer so that they can refer their congregate ministers or members of their particular churches.
In our community and beyond. Yeah, we've attempted to try to make contact in one way or another with pastors and churches all over our coverage area. So we're expanding that, and yeah, we would love to have the opportunity to come out and speak to small groups, Sunday school groups, sometimes seniors groups about life transitions and dealing with some of the issues of aging. We're all doing it, but all of those things are things that, because we consider ourselves a teaching hospice, that we welcome the opportunity to get into churches and speak with people about what hospice is and how we can, in the words of our mission, make the end of life both comfortable and meaningful.
Thank you very much, Greg Wooten, representing Safe Haven Hospice, performing a wonderful service for folks in the several counties. Thank you very much for sharing this message with us this time.
Thank you.
I did find a quote that's somewhat apropos of our subject matter this morning by none other than Mother Teresa, to whom you just referred a while ago. Kind words can be short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. Thank you for Viewpoint. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.